Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, theists and atheists alike. We are NCG, and this is the place, and I am Diana Clarion. Got a really interesting show coming up tonight. Dr. Jones has put the title up as The Existence of God is an Empty Proposition That Theists and Atheists Are Clamoring On About. You know, I may call myself an atheist, but I do find myself very much in agreement with this. Because as I've said before a few times, and I'm going to say it again, it is more important to me what someone does with what they believe than what that belief actually is. So this particular program can speak to the belief itself and why it's really not necessary. With us tonight, we're having Bob Graves, and we're having Stephen Hoyt. Bob Graves will start off, and then we'll go to Stephen. And first of all, Bob and Dr. Jones are going to be talking about old school belief models, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing what that's all about. So, as it appears, both of Mickey's hands are on the 12. I think I will hand things over to Dr. Jones and Bob and give them a little bit of time to do some talking. How about that, Dr. Jones?
I tell you what, I like your comment when it comes to both of Mickey's hands are on the 12. I mean, that's nice. Where'd you get that?
That comes from a Fire Sign Theater album. They were a comedy group that became popular in the 60s, and from one of their albums, the extended quote is, "Both of Mickey's hands are on the 12, so it's 6 a.m. in Goonrot." And that just stuck with me.
Yeah, I tell you what, that is powerful, so powerful. We have a lot to add, that is tonight. We're going to have a lot of fun, to say the least. Don't get too rigid. Bob and I are going to go about 10, 15 minutes tops. We're going to be talking about some old school stuff, and mixed a little bit with, more of a modern or postmodern outlook on belief. But welcome, Bob.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
I like your shirt.
Yeah, I gave blood the other day, and so they gave me this shirt. It was free.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I like the colors a lot. And you didn't watch the Rockets lose the game the other night, is that correct?
I couldn't even tell you who the Rockets are.
Okay, the Houston Rockets, I think they missed 27 three-point shots in a row. I mean, the likelihood of that happening would be, it's more likely, I think, to be hit by lightning than the odds on what took place the other night. I mean, they
Someone must
played.
have jammed their fingers.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Right.
terrible. And so I'm a big basketball fan. I'm not so into sports these days, but I played basketball, had to quit for various reasons, but I do enjoy the game very
So it was
much.
Houston, huh?
I beg your pardon? Yeah, it's
So it's
Houston
Houston.
Rockets, and they were playing people. You can't give them an inch. I mean, these guys can shoot. I mean, it's going to be amazing. So LeBron James, he's going to be, I think, challenged by Golden State. I mean,
Okay, help me out. What's a Houston?
hello, Bob. Okay, we're talking about belief. Okay, I'm going to read a
We
bit.
have a problem. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, anyways, we're talking about.
We're talking about belief, and I want you to frame it in a more of a psychological context, okay, a psychological state possibly. Let me read one particular paragraph, and let me see if you agree or disagree, or just cut into it a bit with your wisdom. Belief is not a momentary mode of consciousness. It is a habit of mind, essentially enduring for some time, and mostly, at least, unconscious. And like other habits, it is until it meets with some surprise that begins its dissolution, perfectly self-satisfied. Doubt is of an altogether contrary genus. It is not a habit, but the privation of a habit. Now, a privation of a habit, in order to be anything at all, must be a condition of erratic activity that in some way must get superseded by a habit. And that would be by someone by the name of Pierce. I mean, Pierce, Bain, and others back in the day. They were writing things like this. Bain in 1859, and I think Pierce, some of his work is around 1905 or so. So what say you?
I disagree with the statement. It strikes me as being running wild with a couple of observations, and then taking them to a naive extent. Yeah, it's true that doubt is different from belief, but not necessarily by much. I mean, if there's something that is without proof, but it seems that it's something you resonate with as real, there will be a level of psychological belief. And if it is something that you don't resonate with, there will be a level of doubt. And it seems to me that you can even have the two together if you find yourself hemming and hawing with a variety of different issues that could. So, I mean, I don't. My feeling is that the person who wrote that has an axe to grind, and they're setting the stage for it, or they're just not aware of their biases and how they're writing that in there. So, I mean, it's kind of like close, but so far off that it's not reliable. That's my feeling.
Okay. Now, when you look at so many of the works that Stanford philosophers are putting out, belief is typically referred to, and I'm not just saying that there is one way of looking at it, but they suggest that, when a person is looking at a proposition, they call it a propositional attitude. In other words, it's a take on something, it's a stance on something, The second paragraph here in this particular PDF file would be, but what is the nature of the readiness to act or disposition in what a belief consists? Pierce is clear on the fact that a disposition is not an actuality, but a potentiality. Belief is not a set of actual behaviors, but of possible behaviors. Pierce insists that habits are potentialities which are not actualized. This because every habit implies the existence of a law or general fact, which has the character of a would-be, or in modern terms, a counterfactual conditional. What say you?
Boy, it sounds to me like it's confusing a wide variety of things. I mean, you can call a belief a behavior of mind, but it's not clear to me whether they're talking about the beliefs not being real until such time as they affect some outward behavior, observable behavior. It sounds that way to me. I'd have to see the context more to know that. But a belief is the way you resonate with the way things appear to you to be. And of course, that doesn't necessarily precipitate an action until such time as there's something to do that might depend upon what you're going to do based on what it is you believe to be the case. I don't know. This sounds to me almost like a denial of the psychology underlying it, as if it sounds behavioristic to me, as if things aren't real until such time as you actually do something outward. Some behaviorists have been accused of almost denying the fact there's even an internal life. That's just my reaction to it.
Right.
I understand belief to be an actual cognitive operation, something that the human brain can do, and its a capacity to do it is irrespective of whatever the object of that belief is. You can't. Just as you can't adopt a language without linguistic acquisition capacity within your brain, likewise, you can't believe something without possessing belief capacity in your brain to be able to perceive that something probably is the case, even though there's no way to determine it. And so you are, as a part of your probability engine, your brain has this ability to guess. at what might be likely true, even though you don't know for any certain fact that it is. And this is just a normal human ability. Everybody believes various different things about various different things. And some people want to take the idea of belief in God as if somehow this is a very special brain operation. And in terms of just the ability to believe something, I don't think there's anything unusual or unique going on. Maybe the object of belief is unusual and unique, but not the human ability to believe. So, I mean, that's the way I would see it.
Okay, let me pull this out a minute. Logic, 1902, by the way. For every habit has or is a general law. Whatever is truly general refers to the indefinite future, for the past contains only a certain collection of such cases that have occurred. The past is actual fact, but a general fact cannot be fully realized. Now, this particular author goes on to say, now Pierce is cautious not to say that belief is any sort of habit or disposition, such as the disposition to sneeze when one catches a cold. Two features distinguish belief from other sorts of dispositions. First, belief is active in the imagination. And this becomes very, very interesting. I've read so many different articles and case studies concerning this lately, and so I'm wanting to hear what other people have to say concerning all of this. You only have a couple of minutes left. What would you say concerning belief, that is, when people are talking about belief? Generally, what do they mean by that?
Well, it is true that belief involves, something cognitive, something imagined, say, as opposed to some reflexive action that is created by nerve impulses that create an involuntary reaction, such as the reflex of your knee when it's pushed there, or a sneeze that occurs when certain tensions build up. But to me, belief is the human ability, as I've already really kind of stated it, but perhaps not as direct, is that it's the human ability to, in a situation where the facts are not determined, cannot be known, and yet might be relevant to some sort of a choice or decision or perspective that seems important to the person. Belief is that circumstance or situation or case, such as would seem most likely to the person to be that which could be counted on if one had to. That it's that it is definitely a cognitive operation, but it's part of the way that we navigate the challenges of life, and the challenges of life come to all of us in various ways. And when it comes to those challenges of life, we can't really test them all. We can't really know everything, and there are times when we have to act on what we're going to assume must be likely to be the truth, even though we don't know that it is. And this can be something as simple as every time you sit in a chair, you don't ever, if you've sat in a chair once, you know that chairs can break, but you're not necessarily in the habit of constantly verifying the structural credibility of a chair every time before you sit down. I mean, we can't live our lives that way. There isn't time to verify everything. And so in order to cope and go about our days, in the activities that we do, we have to assume that a great number of things are as they were, even without proof. And so that's why humans have the ability to believe at all. And when it comes to belief in God, that is an attempt to use that capacity in some sort of an ultimate sense of why we're even here, or whatever, or how we make sense of all of it, some all-inclusive explanation, which most people would acknowledge can't be known or can't be proven. But whatever it is, the very fact that there is an overall reality means something explains it, even if I don't know what it is.
Okay, I want to read one comment, and I want you to say what you how this resonates with you or whatever, simply because we have some people here that I think really make up some wonderful people, and that would be Chad. He's back in the
awesome.
comments section, which is wonderful. Janine Clark is as well. That is so good. She writes, yes, very true. We are storytelling machines. I love that. We create characters and plots and good guys and bad, yet reality itself does not match this method. Then she states a little bit later, let me read this. She says, I am a community of trillions of living cells, yet only in thought alone am I a single object. So I thought that was very well put.
That's interesting, yeah.
Your
I would
thoughts on
say
that?
this, though, I think it's an overstated thing. There are many beliefs that we might have that when it comes time to being able to actually have access to the details and the facts relevant, we discover a lot of our beliefs are just phooey, nonsense. But at the same time, we also discover many times that some of the things that we believe, once we have access to the facts, we were right. It's you act on a hunch. Your detective even has a concept of who done it, and they find the evidence, and they finally end up proving something that they were really suspicious of all along. Belief is certainly nowhere near as reliable as actual evidence and proof. But because it's unreliable, that doesn't mean it's always unreliable. There are plenty of things we probably believe in that if we could know, we'd discover, you're right. As well as there are things that we would be wrong about. So it's certainly not the sort of thing that one would consider to have the same credibility as that which logically and evidentially must be so. But at the same time, the mind is of such a nature that the things that you find yourself believing are in many ways involuntary. It possesses a congruity with all of your thoughts that you're not even necessarily fully aware of. And so some of your beliefs can be based upon your ignorance and your naivete. And when two people have a different set of ignorances and a different set of experiences and a different set of explanations for things, they can believe different things.
That's awesome. I wish you were staying, Bob. I mean, we're going to miss you this evening, but I know you have to go. And I'd like for all of you in the comment section to do me a favor and all of us a favor. I want you to say something great about Bob because, yes, he's better than Einstein ever was. Thank you, Bob, for joining tonight. Thanks. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of fun with the topic. And I believe that you will.
I believe you heard it from Bob Graves. Yes, he's an amazing individual. He's second to none. And so is Stephen Hoyt. I mean, I'm so honored to have him on this show tonight. So honored to have him on time after time after time. He's really shaking up the community of people who have not given enough thought to this and that. And so that said, Stephen, come on in.
Well, good evening.
I can't see you. For some reason, I need someone to switch to Stephen. There you go. Let me see Stephen. Stephen.
Howdy.
There you go. Okay, now here's been the question that's been asked of me. And this is a weird question. Is that a shower curtain behind you?
Yeah, I was going to actually make that one of the first comments that I addressed. I went back last week and looked at the chat, and there were several people concerned whether or not I was doing this interview in a shower. No, this is my closet. It's the only place with good enough lighting for my crappy camera, but I don't want you to see a bunch of clothes on hangers, so I just put up a bed sheet behind me. That's it. Sorry.
Hey, that's the way that real studios actually work. I mean, that is too cool, too cool. I love that. Okay, let's get right to it. I keep saying this over and over again. Atheism and theism have nothing compelling. And yet, and this is sad, but as much condemnation as I found in theism, that is in the church, I'm finding now in atheism. I'm not suggesting that I'm an atheist, but I'm suggesting that I'm opening my arms to atheists and theists alike, agnostics. I want to get along with people. I want the conversation to be great. I want people to be willing to nurture one another and love one another and yet put things on the table so we can figure X, Y, and Z out. But People go south with you quickly. I mean, what's going on in this great, great, great debate, Stephen?
I don't know, and I don't know why people are valuing what they're valuing. To me, if I when I'm talking to somebody that's hell bent on being a theist, I don't even try to argue whether or not they're right about that there's a God or not. I try and make the point that if there is a God and it does not practically matter in some way, well, then it doesn't matter if there's a God that exists. So for atheists to be all about arguing yes or no, there's a God is a little off, because even if you can admit that there is a God and it's manifest in reality the same way nothing does, well, then practically God doesn't exist. And so what's the big fuss about? And the job for the theist then is to say, here's why my ideas about God matter, even if there isn't a God. And at that point, you've disconnected all God talk from the existence of God at all, and can get on to more meaningful conversations. But yeah, I don't know why. Maybe it's just simpler to be in opposition on such a binary proposition. Yes or no, there is a God.
Well, one of the things that I have found to be true, that my tie is more interesting than what I find in the God debate, simply because atheists take approaches, that is, let's say, with the biblical text, that are certainly not scientifically measured out, and theists do as well. Those people who really know what they're talking about typically don't get in the debate. Why is that?
Searching with being open to suggesting that if I'm wrong and here are my experiences and the reality that I'm facing, and those are what I'm relying on to say that I'm right, well, then I've got a problem, you know. So I really don't know. Some people are more cautious, and some people are more liberal with being enthusiastic about belief in God.
Now, my question to you, are you more entertained with my tie or God?
Well, with your tie and your shirt combination, it's very outspoken. It works for you.
It's loud, and some people think that I really am divine because I have an orange pin that matches. I mean, there's something about this that really rocks. True?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Definitely.
there you go. Okay, let's cut to the chase and get to it. I mean, you're going to throw both theism and atheism under the bus, not for the purposes of condemning anyone who might find themselves, that is, in either position, but let's have something that's substantive, that would really get all of us to rethink where we find ourselves. Go for it.
Well, I might do that in simple terms and just say here are some problems for either side, and they're big problems. And the first one, just because it's the easiest to state, would be with atheism. In order to be the kind of atheist that says, I do not believe there is a God or gods, you have to have some concept of God in mind in order to reject it. And that's the problem for them, because it doesn't matter if it's Yahweh that someone is telling you about. That's someone else's conception. You can get rid of all man-made conceptions, but if you're of the kind of atheism that says no God at all, past, present, or in the future exists, then what is it that you're saying doesn't exist? Because especially in the future ones, they're you have to have a concept in mind. If you don't, and I think I tried to make this case last time, you would be arguing based on logic to disconnect yourself from all ideas of or concepts of God. You would then be just logically arguing about some supernatural something that can't exist. But again, you're in the process of becoming a metaphysician, and everything that you say is just a matter of logic, and it should become very uninteresting for the atheist to talk about that way. Because what an atheist, from my experience, really cares about is what are those crazy theists doing with their religion and trying to impose it on me. What they're really interested in doing is rejecting other people's concepts and their behaviors that are committed to those ideas. So, stick to what matters most and argue that from the atheist perspective. The other problem, it takes a little bit longer to set up for the theist, but it's a huge problem, which is people think that because there's logic or order or morality, mathematics, happy fuzzy feelings, whatever it is, they think that these experiences and these ideas that they are having exist only because God exists. All you can say is those experiences are real, and then you have to consider, am I certain that God exists outside of those experiences and ideas? And if you're not certain, then you have to consider the fact that those exist, those ideas and experiences that I'm attributing to God might just be experiences and ideas that I'm having, because there, in fact, might not be a God. So you have to go outside of those experiences in order to prove or affirm your certainty. Otherwise, it becomes circular. You can't say that the reason that there's logic is because there's a God, because we know logic exists. That's all we know. It's a way of thinking, and that exists. We could be in a universe without a God. So how does the existence of logic tell us one way or another about the existence of God? Well, other than say so, I don't think that you can point to anything. The most important thing, when we're going back to say your models of belief that you were talking about with Bob, made a great point. The reason why beliefs matter is because they are commitments to behave one way or another. So we have an idea of reality, and what matters about our beliefs being in line with our perceptions of reality is that our lives depend on it, either literally, or at least our quality of life can be better or worse if we get our beliefs wrong. So in the sense that there may not be a God, yet there's meaningfulness in God talk, there's meaningfulness in religious practices, there's meaningfulness in certain ideas that we're engaging in from that standpoint. Those all have meaning derived outside of the existence of God. We're prepared to act a certain way, but our actions are relative to those experiences that we're having when we're employing the ideas, not necessarily because there is a God or not a God. So the problem for theists is to somehow pin our ideas about God on an actual God. There has to be something that we're referring to when we say the word God. As far as a lot of theologians go, and most philosophers that I know can't get past that hurdle. There may be something like a God that exists outside of nature, but due to our limitations in just understanding things in natural conceptions, there's no way to have epistemic knowledge of God, including the existence of God and any relevant thing we might want to say God is. We can only say there's some mystery, possibly some mystery beyond what we can experience in nature, and then have to leave it at that. So anyway, does that set up a couple of set of problems for each side?
I think so. Let me state this, and this is a bit different than what you're suggesting here. Back in 1978 or early 79, I was actually ministering at a particular church that was actually a bowling alley at one time, and then it turned into a church, and there were lots and lots of people there. But to make a long story short, I said something during that message. I said when we look at the Abjad, that is the Old Testament writing system, and we look at it measurably so, that is to see what these people were attempting to do, I put on the table, God is but the abstraction of the idea by which people have oriented themselves to produce a functional society. And I said, within the context of this Abjad, it's apparent that the God term, in this sense, Elohim, and the modeling of Yahweh, it was like these people were using it as a rhetorical device. And when they gathered, they would chant, they would sing, they would try to resonate with each other. So Torah was more poetic than, let's say, a determinate nomenclature. It was like taking 12 tribes and trying to get people just to come together to have conversation. And so am I off? That is, when talking about that kind of theism, that is more or less a modality, that is a construct by which we orient ourselves to produce something functional, that is, in society, like civility.
No, you're not off. I think that's a common approach that a lot of theologians have had over the years. You're certainly in line, not sticking out as some kind of unique oddity. But yeah, that's the utilitarian side of things. If we can realize there's a problem with trying to say that this set of propositions actually we can some way verify that they're about God.
I mean, even the Apostle Paul's work, if you look at the entire Pauline corpus, does he approach Jesus outside of mystery? The answer to that question technically is no. Does he present Jesus Christ as a literal person with this event that took care of our sins A to Z and all of that? No. That's based upon failed meta-language. But when we look at the text, that the various manuscripts that we do have extant, we can see that Christ presented by Paul is in a sense this ultimate transcendent value. And so it's more of a value set that Paul was trying to nuance than, let's say, the Lord thy God. What say you?
I think you're very close to. I usually, when talking about Pauline literature, I reference N.T. Wright and Jimmy Dunn, who I think are two of the foremost scholars today on Pauline literature. And yeah, it's always worth noting that Paul doesn't talk about Jesus at all. It's Christ.
Right.
And it's not Christ of the Old Testament. It is a cosmic idea. And then you have to really dig into what new way is this person looking at such an old idea, and how are they trying to move us forward with that idea?
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, the reason that I'm bringing this up, it has to do with what's going on in the debate. The debate seems to be here, and they keep talking about substance in both Old and New Testaments, but these writers seem to be foreign to what we're talking about in the debate.
Well, yeah, you can't. You really have to go to some really far out places to get into a good conversation. That's something great in terms of debate. Most are really shallow regurgitations of not very good ideas, usually from Dawkins or from, let's say, on the other side, from Frank Turek. Really low caliber thoughts.
Well, I'm simply saying, whether you talk to Dawkins or whether you talk to someone on the theistic side, these people are abysmally ignorant. It appears, that is, of scientific method and practice, that is, toward the manuscripts in higher and lower forms of textual criticism. And so, their renderings are, it's as if they need to go to Reading Comprehension 101 and start all over again. And so I don't get it. The great debate is so focused with something that, the Bible is always inserted. It's always depicted as something that it's actually not. When I talk, let's say, with fundamentalists, typically you hear, this is the perfect Word of God, the inerrant Word of God, it's harmony, and blah, blah, blah. And none of that is true. And it's like, you stop the conversation when you start dealing with the data, because the data suggests something completely different. But I don't find that when I talk to fundamentalist Christians or fundamentalist atheists, they're willing to listen to scientific method and practice that is in the approach to the text. And so what's going on in the landscape of atheism and theism? Because in my mind, and I stand to be corrected, if atheism is simply a response to what people are saying about X, Y, and Z about God in the Bible, that's a much different thing to look at than a response to the question. Would that be true? In other words, if I asked you, is there a God? And then you started bringing up, the Bible, and you started going to that, and so many people are saying, well, I'm an atheist because I read the Bible. And, why are we running away from the question? Why are we not becoming a little bit more curious about developing methods, that is, to approach this question? Because, what is God? I've never heard anyone give me an articulate a definition of God that wasn't actually just lexical cartoons. So what say you?
You're right. I can't fault the atheist for rejecting what's being presented. Why should they care about lexical analysis and paradigmatic and syntagmatic? Why should they care about any of that? Someone is presenting that to them, and if someone is uneducated with scripture and they present what's basically bullshit, well, whether it's filet mignon or bullshit being served to an atheist, why should they be an expert on what's being presented?
Okay, I guess my point is, if we're talking about biology, I expect the person that I'm talking to, if they want to argue for a particular thing concerning biology, I expect them to be competent. And so if a person is arguing, namely about the substance of the text, I expect them to at least be well read. Is that, should I lower my expectations?
Well, no, there's got to be a common ground between the two people that are arguing together. And typically you're going to have better conversations the more educated people are. But the fact of the matter is, most atheists that are engaged in the conversation are once fundamentalist Christians who still haven't done any better job of studying scripture than they did before. So you get rejections of not this umbrella idea of what God is, but this one particular conception, with still behind that the belief that there is only one true God and it's defined this way. And so when I reject that God, there is no other thing for me to think about. So it's a lack of thought, but you have to think about the practical side of it. How much work should I be required to do to reject what I think is a shitty idea? If I don't think there's a God, I just don't think there's a God. And you have to come up with some compelling reasons to make anyone change their mind, I would think. So, if someone comes up with, again, with common ground, you can talk about it. But if you have someone, let's say, for instance, I'm a theist and I go to talk to an evangelical that's more fundamentalist, they're going to think I'm an atheist. But I'm really talking as honestly as I can about what I mean about God. But it doesn't entail to any kind of certainty about this description, this evangelical description of how everything works out is true. And so they can be, I can be in concert with somebody as long as I have the same meanings and whatnot. But as soon as we differ from common ground, then you may as well be just in the same line as an atheist. We don't agree on what the arguing points are. So the problem here is that when you have the great debate, there is necessarily common ground, and that's what you argue. You just have to educate yourself and then find a better group of people if you want a better conversation about the problems of theism and atheism.
Is there a difference between a philosophical claim, and I hear this all the time, someone is saying, well, they've made a claim. Is there a difference between, let's say, putting forth a proposition based upon belief and a proposition based upon faith?
No, well, let me put it this way. There are propositions which are, in the simplest meaning. A proposition is a descriptive sentence about a state of affairs or a perceived state of affairs. A belief is an attitude about the state of affairs, and you can also have an attitude about the proposition about states of affairs. When we are, well, back up and ask me the question again, and I'll start from that point.
Let me come back to it simply because, I think that I wanted to make another point before I come back to that, but I've met so many atheists over the last 5 to 10 years, and I've been in conversations with atheists ever since I was a little kid. They've had a lot of influence on my life, and I'm very, very thankful for atheists being in my life, and I hope that that continues to be the case. I'm not an atheist, nor do I claim to be a theist in the sense that most people want to talk about theist. I would rather refer to myself, if it's understood as an agnostic, if it's understood as one who is simply suspending my judgment concerning the question. Now, when it comes to these stories, I resonate with poetry. I resonate with how sociological constructs come together. We seem to do a lot with our imagination that I think that we need to put a little bit more work into. We're very imaginative, if you will. And so I'm not willing to walk away from my imagination, my creativity, for the sake of someone saying everything has to be empirically put together. I just think that's a bit absurd. But my point is, when I'm talking with people, it's telling, typically, this is not always the case, when I meet someone who is a Jehovah's Witness and they become an atheist, it's almost as if now they're a Jehovah's Witness atheist. If they were a Southern Baptist and then they become an atheist, it's almost like their way of looking at the world is through that Southern Baptist worldview, in a sense, but in a different way. Am I making any sense to you?
Yeah, and I was hoping that you would, if you backed up and re-asked the question, maybe it would come. It's a big subject, and I think what you were originally asking was, are we making claims by having a belief? Are we making claims by stating a proposition? And it's there's such a big of how to answer that question that I think now I can keep it a little bit more simple and say assertions are what have some kind of onus or burden of proof, as they call it. And assertions are a speech act. It has nothing to do with epistemology. It has nothing to do with whether or not something is true or anything like that. It's when we're in conversation and we hit a bump in the road because somebody has said something that is disagreeable to another person, you try and smooth over. It's just a matter of etiquette. Smooth over the difficulty in coming to an agreement so the conversation can move on. That's different from saying that if I have a belief, I have what some people are poorly calling a burden of justification, in a way of making that identical to a burden of proof, which that's not the same thing. We have an ethics to what we believe. Everyone that has a belief should have some kind of justification for those beliefs. And so that's a different thing from saying, because I have asserted something as being true of the world, I now am making a claim. An assertion is a claim, therefore I have a burden of proof, that sort of thing. So just by me saying I am an atheist or I am a theist doesn't impose any burden on me at all. A speech act from an assertion could be that I'm explaining or I'm disclosing what my beliefs are. So if I disclose to you I don't believe there's a God, I'm telling you what my attitude is toward that state of affairs. It is true. If you ask me to justify that, well, how do I justify that this is what I believe? So you only justify things that you assert are true. Now, whether or not you believe something and then whether or not you believe that something is also true are, again, two different things. It's propositional versus doxastic. And again, those are terms that we throw around here quite freely. But yeah, it's two different things.
Okay. Diana, are you getting this, or is this getting a bit confusing, or is it clearing some things up for you?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm listening here, and I'm finding myself agreeing with some things, disagreeing with some things. For example, I heard Stephen say that way in the beginning that the involvement was what you do with a belief. Did I hear that correctly, Stephen?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and this is my position. It's, as I said at the beginning of the show, not so much the belief I have, but the actions I perform as a result of holding that belief. So to me, I like the way, I think it was Stephen Weinberg put it. I don't think enough about God to know that I'm an atheist. I mean, I'm concerned basically with what you are doing in the name of your God or in the name of humanist values or whatever it happens to be. And if we want to talk about God at some point, I mean, some people may find comfort in such a concept, and I'm sure that Rabbi David Wolpe would look at me askance when I say that, because he has more than once complained that when people justify their atheism, it is by reason, and when they complain about theism, they call it an appeal to emotion, and he doesn't like the two of those. He wants reason on both sides. But to me, again, the action is the most important thing. And if when I'm in discussion with somebody who is performing actions in the name of their God that are hurtful to other people, if I have to attack that basic belief of theirs in their God, if that's the only way or the best way that I can go to try to let at least the audience, if not that person, know that they're not quite doing it right, that's what I'm going to do. And as a matter of fact, the video I just put in the can yesterday morning, we were talking about it on Wednesday. I do that to some extent. Now, have I made any sense?
Yeah. What say you, Stephen?
No, that's great. I'm running through my head the different things that we've had in other conversations. One of those would be what you're initially talking about with what are our God ideas about. For me, I think I carry all labels, but I'm also including apatheism. I'm apathetic to the question of whether or not God exists, but I'm very concerned about God talk in general.
Sure.
Even though I think within my own reasoning, nothing that we say about God can be known to be about God. And indeed, I don't think it can be about God at all in any possible way. It comes from the natural idea that when we're looking at experiences in life and we're looking at phenomena and things like that, they generally only prove ideas that are in themselves natural. So I don't know how we go in reverse and then say we're only doing metaphysics when we say these natural things that exist, these phenomena and experiences and ideas, that they go beyond nature and then start giving ontological descriptions of some thing outside of nature. So the part that's meaningful is engaging the ideas, and that's irrelevant to the question of whether or not there's a God. So that brings us back to kind of the same the common ground that I'm talking about. As an atheist, you should be concerned about what my ideas about God are, and not so concerned about whether or not, or even disproving that there is or isn't a God of that description. Who cares? The problem is that if I believe X, Y, and Z about God, and I'm committed to act in accordance with X, Y, and Z, that's all the atheist should be concerned about. And whether or not you call God silly or think God is silly or the ideas and all that kind of stuff, I'll just focus on the behavior, because that's what matters to either of us. Whether or not you're an atheist or a theist, it's what ideas am I committed to, and then that brings the atheist into a more engaging point in the conversation, because then I can ask them, well, what ideas are motivating and life-changing for you in regards to the same kinds of questions that these religious ideas are speaking to with me? Because we're both human beings, we're going to have similar concerns. So you have to look for some way to talk beyond the stupidity of whether or not there's a God. What does it matter if there is or isn't a God? What's at stake for the atheist? What's at stake for the theist? And honestly, if you're evangelical and you get asked, well, what's at stake? And your answer is hell, oh my God, I think you seriously lost the point. You know what I mean? It's got to be about an experience, an ever improving experience based on our ever evolving improvements to the ideas that we're pinning on God.
The thing that I
Yes,
like
and-
about having you on the show, Stephen, has to do with this. You seem more concerned about someone's psychological well-being, their sociological well-being, and so on. You're not interested in people fussing. If they are going to make a philosophical argument, you're wanting them to be sound, that is, in form and function. I appreciate that very much in every way. I applaud that. That's very, very good. And so thank you for sharing that. I mean, you keep making points that make me think that you're all about being a compassionist. Am I wrong?
I don't know about being compassionate. I think it's more reflecting on where I've been in my life, and I don't really care about what people believe, but I care a lot about how they come to thinking about how they've arrived at their beliefs. And if they've done it just by some kind of contrivance, well, that's robbed them of something vital,
Right.
and they can't even connect with what it is that they believe in some deeper sense. And if you're going to believe that there is no God, I want you to believe it and think about it and be able to absorb it all in deep ways, because the deeper you think about the question of God, the more into your own understanding of who you are as a person is going to become the issue, and you're going to know how to better live in the world as a human being. And it's this very same thing as a theist would do. It's just you come away with different narratives, different ideas
Right.
about God and humanity. And if your idea is that there's no God that has anything to do with humanity, well, it's going to affect what you think about humanity. Same thing if you think God is intimately involved and cares about our human well-being. Well, you know, which path do you go? I don't really care about anything else, but how we get to the ideas that we're having. So I'll fuss a lot about somebody coming to maybe good conclusions, but with shitty premises or flawed thinking. I'll beat somebody up all day long about that. But whatever their conclusion is, as long as we can work together and get to those conclusions in a reasonable way, I'm cool with it, whatever conclusions they're making. But it's all for the benefit of the thinker and the engagement of other thinkers that have to go through the same processes that we all do, even though we might share different conclusions. So if that's compassion, then sure, I'll take it. I think it's just being particular.
Well, I'm going to condemn you as being a compassionist. Okay, we do have people in the audience who are theists, and I have no problem with people being a theist or an atheist. I don't see anything compelling either way. And when I say that, I don't mean to disparage anyone. In fact, Ernie Deaver is in the comment section, and he stated, God himself indwells his people. I remember a time in which I resonated with that in a great way, and it moved me. I'm not there now, but I'm not going to try to take that away from you. I would rather talk with you instead of down to you. And so if you'd like to share some of your thoughts, I'd love for you to come on the place and share your thoughts about X, Y, and Z. That would be wonderful. Because one of the things that I want to do over the next few years is to not just extend a hand to people, but maybe an olive branch. I want to make peace. I want to do everything that I can to get rid of the againstness. I want to do everything that I can to explore what it would be like if people became more disciplined. It may be less entertaining, but if people became a little bit more disciplined in philosophy, in theology, in biology, and so on, I think this would be a much better conversation. Maybe more boring, maybe less Trumpish. And so I don't know, maybe I'm just rambling, but I don't know. When I look at the data that we do have, I keep going back to something very, very simple, Stephen. If I say A plus B equals C, and I ask little Johnny what A is, and little Johnny says, oh, A is a goat. Little Susie jumps up and says, A is not a goat. I would ask both of them, why did you jump to that conclusion? And I see theism and atheism as that kind of leap. I don't see that we have anything available that would actually suggest either way, God or not God. And this is why I choose, and maybe I'm not choosing this, but I find myself simply suspending my judgment. I think it's the disciplined person who suspends the judgment when you simply have something like A plus B equals C. And I think we have far less, that is, when it comes to the question of God, than we do with A plus B equals C. What say you?
I'm trying to save you from disclaimers. I don't mean to disparage anyone, those kinds of comments. So and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would interpret you as meaning that in saying that there's nothing compelling in atheism or theism, I take you to mean that it's just the question, is there or is there not a God, because it's of such a nature that it can't genuinely be determined or decided. That's what you mean by it's not a compelling question itself, versus someone like the commenter saying that God indwells everyone. Well, that's certainly not an uncompelling thing to say. So I would think that everything a theist believes about the God that they have in mind is incredibly compelling. What might not be is how they arrived at those, because it's not necessarily the premises that a theist is concerned about. It's the conclusions that they've come to, and it's hard really to make a criticism that because of God being what we supernatural, that we ought to have reasons at all that justify our belief that there is something like a God. It may be that's the uncompelling part, but there are still compelling reasons to think the way we are thinking about God, and those are justified by living those out. And we have an empirical sense because we thought this way, that God is like this as a state of affairs, and we've lived in correspondence or in line with those ideas, and we seem to be getting affirmation in living those out. So that might be what makes everything compelling, is that there's an experience that goes along with the belief, and it's affirmed when we live out those beliefs. But yeah, that's just to kind of keep you from having to make disclaimers. Yeah, we should all be apathetic about the proposition of the existence of God, but none of us can be, particularly the more important the ideas are, or what's at stake in our ideas about the existence of God. We all have to care about what people are thinking about God.
Okay. I keep asking for someone to give me something. Why should I lean this way or that way? I've heard nothing that compels me. And so I keep saying that there's nothing compelling. That is from me. I don't see anything where you would find, let's say, a group of scientists or philosophers that would come together and say, yeah, this is a model that's very, very compelling. I don't see that happening. Now, when people find themselves, namely in atheism or theism, they find that perhaps for personal reasons, not, let's say, logical reasons. Or we could say that we can actually make up, phrase it in a way that it would sound logical. Or am I wrong? Am I off base here?
No, and you're bringing up to mind the idea that because there are we can make sound arguments for the existence of God, and a sound argument is one that has real, true premises that lead to a necessary conclusion. We can have those arguments for the existence of God and for the non-existence of God. And you have to wonder what we're dealing with here that would be persuasive, because that's just a matter of logic. And a necessary conclusion does not mean in real life we've proved anything about reality.
Right.
So if logic doesn't prove anything about reality, and we've got the same set of circumstances that we're all in, and we can conclude either way, what is it that makes a person lean towards theism or lean towards atheism? Because it can't be saying, well, because there's a sound argument for or against.
Right.
It's our total perception and impressions of where we are as a human being in reality, and what everything has led up to this prepared moment to hear this question. There exists a God. We're already prepped for the answer to that, regardless of what the reasonings are. And we are so prepped that we are warranted to even believe what we already believe about the question, in despite there being incredibly good reasons to change our mind. Because again, the reasons themselves are not the compelling part. Why do we agree with those reasons?
Right.
Again, it's because we've already been prepped. So we can disregard, and then that's where you get into a whole bit about, well, this is where it matters about being ethical with our beliefs. Should a person who thinks they're warranted to believe in God, who can't articulate even one reason why they are entitled to their beliefs, should they be able to still hold that belief, or should they get rid of it? And that's hard to address, because again, if you take the coherence theory of knowledge, well, it would be more ethical to go with what these already existing beliefs that have earned their right to be a part of our system of knowledge. That's the basis of justifying the way we're already vented towards whatever. And this new information, well, it may be good reasoning for someone else, but it seems so foreign to everything I already believe that I should just reject it. So those are, and nothing about belief in the question of God is easy. And again, it's all coming down to, there's no compelling way, like you're saying, to get to an answer. So I think we all ought to be apatheist to the question of God's existence, and then we all really ought to be very concerned about what we do with ideas of God.
That's a good way of putting it. Skeptical Jed made some comments here that I do want to address. I have a lot of respect for him, by the way. He said, "Come to the Children's Hospital with me tomorrow, Dr. Jones, and I will show you some compelling reasons." He said, "I'm in surgery with him all day." When I was young, I was walking home from school, only to walk into my home to find that there was blood all over the floor. And people were there crying, panicked. And what had taken place was my mother and father, they had always taken the time during the day simply to put our, my brothers, all of us, to bed, that is, during the middle of the day to, take a nap. And they actually took my two little brothers and put them in the bedroom and said, take a nap, and they fell asleep. And so my mom and dad, they went into their room and laid down only to hear a crash. And what they heard was my youngest brother wanting to see some of the new fish, the babies, if you will. And he pulled on the tank. And back in that day, these were not tanks that had safety glass. He pulled on the tank, and my other brother was there simply trying to assist. And he pulled the tank over, and it broke, and the tank hit him right here. It cut my brother's head off except for about a half inch of skin. My mother and father got up, screaming, put the head back on, crying out to Jesus, crying out to God, save my baby. When I finally got to the hospital, my mom was just blood-soaked, crying. My youngest brother was dead, obviously. And my other brother, he was so cut up. They were doing surgery on him, but couldn't put him to sleep, and he was screaming. And I said as a young kid, "Where are you, God?" And he wasn't there. So I can identify with the pain that we go through in life. It's hard to talk about this simply because I have my mother here in the audience, in the studio audience this evening. I don't want to get into the details of this, but it was a very painful experience to go through. And when I became a minister, to visit the Shriner Burns, as I did on a daily basis, to visit all of these different hospitals and to see all of the people and the conditions that they found themselves in due to accidents, due to this and that. It's horrible. To see babies born that look like frogs, to see all of this, it brought me to a place of question. And so I can resonate with those reasons. I really can. Because at the end of the day, where was God when my dad was dying of cancer? I didn't find him. And so my argument isn't there is a God. My argument is I don't know that there is or isn't a God. And if there is a God, I don't know why he would not do what I would do. And so I have put my faith and my trust and confidence in human beings much more than I ever put my trust and confidence in any God. And so a lot of people are upset at me simply because I have suspended my judgment. And sometimes people become upset at me because I tell them that they're better than Jesus, and they would like to think that Jesus is the greatest of all. But this is why I like you, Stephen, on the show, because you're making a difference not just in the people who view this show, you're making a difference in my life. I look at you as someone who is ministering, yes, in many ways, something that challenges my thoughts. The same thing is true with Bob. The same thing is true with Ozzy. The same thing is true with just common, ordinary people who, make comments on this show. So I truly identify with Skeptical Jed. I get that. But when it comes to the question, I have nothing compelling. Now, my desire for God to be a superhero. I would love for him to be a superhero and come and actually make sure that there's no one tonight that dies hungry. No one suffering. I would love for there to be a God who would take us out of our pain. I would love that. But that's not the case. And I think this is what many atheists are saying. And I don't know that atheists are hardcore atheists. I think most people who refer to themselves as atheists simply have been so condemned, or they find themselves in conditions to where they can't imagine there being a God who would not rescue us. And this is why I think the Bible is so important, because we find people in tragedy trying to make sense out of why are we here. And then we get the Christian spin, and it's, for the most part, a lie. This is why I don't like the failed meta language of Christianity, simply because it tells us about a Jesus that never did exist. It doesn't deal with, a scientific method toward, interpreting the text at all. So am I just rambling here, Stephen, or am I making any sense?
No, and we had talked on philosophy of the place of where you originally relayed that story of your little brother. That was hard to hear, and I wasn't expecting that one to be here again. Here's for me, when we're talking about the whole problem of evil or calamity in general. I lost my wife unexpectedly and tragically, and I'm watching my pastor in the process of losing his wife. Mine was just in a matter of hours, and his has been over a course of years. A friend of mine is a theologian and a professor of philosophy, wrote a book called The Uncontrolling Love of God, and it's a great logical way to talk about this subject. And I keep thinking, I wish it was more than just logic, because I would love to get that for my pastor, for other people that are facing these kinds of things. And that's where again, where the rubber meets the road. Right. What's compelling? Well, having all these logical niceties pinned down where everything is sound and whatever, in the face of, okay, well, that explains why these things are happening, but who cares? The things are happening, and they're just something ought to be different. And if you're a God, then you have control over these oughts. Why aren't things different than what they are? And it's not enough it doesn't feel like it's enough just to sit back and say, well, we don't know, and we're not in a position to know, and we're not even in a position to criticize. Well, yeah, we're in a position to criticize. I said last week when we were talking about scripture and just literature in general, can't you see yourself as Atticus Finch or Scout or Boo Radley in the story of To Kill a Mockingbird? Can't you see yourself as Jacob or Isaac in the Old Testament? When we're talking about literature and ideas about God, we're being invited to take on the role of a character in that story. The only thing that I have to say about the problem of evil is that, well, not just evil, but the way things are that don't seem right. Losing a child before the parent should die first, type of thing, or just all the bad things that happen. It's well, I don't know. I'm having a hard time keeping it together, but it's just a.
But isn't that
evil is the way? Possibly the way I think of evil is that we are characters in a story, and it involves a plot where we, rather than God, are forced to do something, and it's to become more in touch with our humanity. And
Right.
the only way to do that is to be forced into a situation where we have to respond to these sorts of circumstances that exist. And without them, we might not realize everything that we are as the kinds of beings that we are. But again, that still seems so, because what's at stake is so high.
You become so human on this show. You're incredibly substantive, Stephen. You care about people. You care about being disciplined. That is, concerning this and that, whether it be psychology, sociology, whether it be philosophy or what. You want things to be well disciplined, and yet you want to talk about these human conditions. And so I'd like to thank you for being on this show once again, because you're pouring your heart out, and yet what you're giving us to think about mentally is challenging. And so thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me. Sorry for rambling so much.
Hey, you didn't ramble. That's the thing that I love about live shows is that, you can take a brilliant person and, the thing that people need to understand, and I want to make this comment. I've said this to you before. I've had so many people on this show who, they rehearse a lot. You can tell everything that they're saying is rehearsed. They've said it 1,000,000 times. I like those people who are not textbook teachers to come on this show. I like people who will say, this is what you're going to get out of the textbook, but I can take you much deeper. And yes, it's going to be messy. It's not going to be as entertaining or as what some people would say, articulate as the other. And that's the thing that I love about people who come here, when people are willing to go beyond the book, drill down, and share it, regardless of whether it's perfect or not. That, to me, is the kind of honesty that you've always had with me, and I cherish that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, before we end the show, I wanted to go back to Diana. What say you about this show?
This has been a very good show as far as I can see. This is bringing the concept of, the God talk and the concept of God out for examination, trying to get to the basis of it and how people use it. And I think we've seen from, or at least I've heard from what's being talked about here, that I think it is more important what people do with their God, with their beliefs about God. Don't get me wrong, the God talk can be very useful. It can be a window into how people see the world. But at the end of it, whether there is a God or whether there is no God, there are people. There are our fellows with whom we have to deal with, to whom we really need to give support. And I think that the people are the most important thing here. Explain it how you will, but deal with them fairly, gently, lovingly.
I agree. If I can nudge people to do this, and I don't like it when people get together and try to convert or deconvert one another, but maybe I'm a hypocrite, because I would like to see people come to the place with the idea of just being human. Let's put what we think to be true to the test. In other words, let's quit trying to be an apologist for whatever we think to be true. Let's open up. Let's open up our hearts. Let's open up our minds. Let's come together. Let's change this world for the better. That is for all of us. With that said, good night, and we do love you very, very much. Thanks for being here. Good night.
Take care, all.